What if I told you that for the 3 days Jesus was in the tomb, he wasn't resting? What if the most pivotal event in history, the victory over death itself, wasn't a quiet moment of waiting, but an all-out spiritual war? The Bible tells us he descended to the dead, but ancient, lost-to-time texts describe what that really meant. It wasn't a peaceful visit. It was a violent invasion, an assault on the very gates of hell. This is the story of how Jesus Christ waged a one-man war against Satan, shattered the dominion of death, and led a prison break of epic proportions. This is the harrowing of hell. For 2,000 years, the image has been cemented in our minds. A cold stone tomb, a massive sealed rock, Roman guards standing watch. Inside, the body of Jesus of Nazareth lies wrapped in linen, still and silent. We're told he rested on that Saturday, the Sabbath, waiting for the glory of the third day. But this picture, this quiet, passive waiting, is tragically incomplete. It misses the action. It misses the war. It misses the entire point of what was truly happening in the heart of reality. While the world above mourned, a dead prophet, to understand what really happened, we have to look beyond the familiar pages of the 4 Gospels. While they are the bedrock of the faith, they focus on the earthly ministry, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. The events between death and resurrection are hinted at in places like 1 Peter, which says Christ went and made a proclamation to the spirits in prison. But what was that proclamation? What did that prison look like? For the full, explosive story, we have to turn to ancient texts like the Gospel of Nicodemus, also known as the Acts of Pilate. These apocryphal works, while not part of the biblical canon, were incredibly influential in the early church. They were read, they were preached, and they filled in the gaps, painting a picture of a conquering warrior Christ who did not simply endure death, but actively defeated it on its home turf. This isn't just some forgotten fairy tale. This story is the theological engine of the resurrection. Without the harrowing, the resurrection is just a miracle for one man. With the harrowing, the resurrection becomes a victory for all humanity. It's the story of a king storming the ultimate fortress to rescue his people. So buckle up. Forget the quiet tomb. We're about to descend into the darkness to witness a battle at the foundations of the world. This is what Jesus actually did for 3 days. The final breath was an earthquake, not in the ground, not in the tearing of the temple veil, though those things happened. The true tremor was in the space between worlds, the shudder that ran through the foundations of reality when the spirit of the Son of Man was willingly unleashed from its vessel of flesh. For a moment, a single, immeasurable moment, there was a silence that was louder than any scream. The cosmos held its breath. The jeering on the hill of Golgotha faded into a distant, meaningless hum. The weeping of the women at the foot of the cross became the sound of a faraway sea. And then the descent began. It was not a fall. A fall implies a lack of control, a submission to gravity. This was a plummet with purpose, a deliberate dive into the deepest trenches of existence. The spirit, now a being of pure, incandescent thought and power, did not travel through soil and rock. It moved through layers of reality, peeling them back like the pages of a dark and ancient book. The first layer was the echo of mortal life, the lingering chaos of human passions, fears, and broken dreams. Whispers clung to him, the ghosts of forgotten prayers and bitter curses. He moved through them, a ship of light through a sea of gray fog, and the whispers dissolved in his wake, silenced by a presence they could not comprehend. These were the fresh dead, the confused, the spirits still tethered to the grief and turmoil of their final moments. He passed through them as a calming balm, his light a silent promise that their confusion was not the final word. Deeper, he passed through the realm of shadow, where things that have no name and no form dwell. These were not demons, not yet. They were the raw stuff of dread, the formless anxieties that lurk at the edge of sleep, the terror of the unknown given a semi-sentience. They shied away from him, recoiling as a slug recoils from salt. His light was an agony to them, a truth their very nature could not endure. The journey was a passage through the collective unconscious dread of all humanity, a river of despair flowing since the first man felt the first pang of fear. He was the stone dropped into this river, and the ripples of his passing were waves of peace that calmed the turbulent waters in a circle expanding ever outward. This was a place of pure negation, where identity bled away into a monochrome nothingness. He moved through it not as a part of it, but as an absolute contradiction to it. His every moment of passage, a declaration that existence was more powerful than its absence. Still deeper, the pressure intensified. This was the crushing weight of oblivion, the absolute finality of death as man understood it. It was a place of profound and utter stillness, a cold that leached all warmth, all hope, all memory. Here, time did not exist. There was only the endless, static is of non-being. This was the great enemy, the void that Satan had promised was the final reward for all. It was meant to be unbreachable, a perfect prison of nothingness. But for the first time, something was moving within it, something with intent. A pinpoint of light, impossibly bright, was pushing against the infinite dark, and the dark, for the first time in its ageless existence, was yielding. It was like watching a diamond push its way through a mountain of tar. The darkness was not just an absence of light, but an active, oppressive force. It resisted. It tried to smother the light, to absorb it, to nullify its very concept. Yet the light did not flicker. It did not dim. It simply advanced, its very nature a weapon that the darkness could not counter. The essence of this light was I am, and the essence of the void was is not. It was a fundamental conflict at the heart of reality itself. Finally, he arrived at the outer perimeter of the place men called Hell, or Sheol, or Hades. It was not a pit of fire, not yet. That was a deeper circle, a more specific punishment reserved for the fallen angels and the truly wicked. This was the antechamber, the great waiting room of the dead, what the Old Testament called the land of darkness and deep shadow. It was a vast, gray expanse under a sky the color of old bruises. There were no stars, no sun, no moon. The only light was a dim, phosphorescent glow that seemed to emanate from the ground itself, casting long, distorted shadows from withered, leafless trees. A river, slow and black as oil, snaked through the landscape, and on its banks waited the countless dead. They were shades, pale and translucent, their faces etched with an eternity of waiting. They did not speak. They did not move. They merely existed in a state of perpetual, listless melancholy. These were not the damned. They were the righteous of the old law, the prophets, the patriarchs, the holy men and women who had lived in faith, but had died before the great sacrifice was complete. They had been promised a Redeemer, but the promise was so old it had become a myth, a faint ache in their spectral hearts. They had been righteous according to the law given to them, but the law could not grant life. It could only point out sin. And so here they waited, held captive not by their own wickedness, but by the universal consequence of the fall, a debt they could not pay. Death, as a law, held them all. In the center of this gray plain stood the gates. They were immense, a towering wall of black, basalt-like material that seemed to drink the already faint light. They were not made of metal or stone, but of something far older and more terrible, solidified pride, arrogance, and despair. The bars were forged from every no ever uttered to God, every act of rebellion, every moment of belief in the supremacy of the self. The great lock was not a mechanism of tumblers and keys, but the very concept of irreversible death, the metaphysical law that said what is done cannot be undone. What is dead cannot live again. The gates were not merely a barrier. They were a philosophical statement, a declaration of Satan's ultimate victory in the long war. They stood as the final, unanswerable argument against hope. Two immense figures, titans of despair and finality, served as the gateposts, their forms carved from solidified grief. The very air around them hummed with a negative energy, a force that drained will and purpose from any who drew near. Within the gates, in the true heart of the infernal domain, a tremor was felt. It was not the shaking of rock, but the vibration of a foreign power. Hades, the ancient, weary warden of this realm, a being more akin to a force of nature than a personality, stirred from his throne of bones. He was Death, the jailer. His existence was simple. He collected, and he kept. He felt the vibration as a jarring note in a symphony of silence that had played for eons. His very essence was the law of endings, and he felt that law being questioned from the outside. Satan, who called himself Lucifer in moments of grand delusion, was there with him. He was not a horned beast with a pitchfork. That was a crude caricature for the feeble minds of men. He was a being of corrupted light, a majestic ruin. His form was one of terrible beauty, marred by an inner emptiness that was a gaping wound. He had been packing, as he always was, a king in a cage of his own making, relishing his recent victory. The Nazarene was dead, the Son of God, broken and bled out on a common criminal's cross. It was a masterpiece of humiliation, his greatest work. He had turned humanity against its own savior. He had used fear, politics, and religious piety as his tools, and they had worked perfectly. The plan of salvation was in ruins. The promise was broken. He had watched the spirit leave the body and had assumed, with all the certainty of his ancient pride, that it was now just another shade, destined for the gray plains, subject to the unbreakable laws of this domain. What is that? Hades' voice was the grating of a tombstone on gravel. It was a voice unused to surprise. Satan paused, his beautiful, terrible face clouded with irritation. It is nothing. The echoes of the upper world. The mortals are having one of their earthquakes. They are sentimental creatures. No, Hades insisted, his form seeming to waver like heat haze. This is not of that world. This is a power directed here. It is a will. It is at the gates. Satan laughed, a sound like shattering glass. Let it be. Nothing has ever breached your gates. They are stronger than the firmament. They are built on the very law of sin and death. What could possibly challenge them? Some wandering ghost, some prophet still clinging to his faded hopes. They are all your subjects now. And then a voice. It did not come through the gates, but through everything. It resonated in the very substance of hell, in the black air, in the stones, in the despairing hearts of the damned. It was a voice of absolute authority, a voice that carried the creative power of a billion suns, yet it was not a shout. It was a command, clear and resonant, as a great bell struck once in a silent cosmos. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lifted up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. The words struck the realm like a physical blow. The gray shades on the plains outside stirred, their heads lifting for the first time in centuries, in millennia. A flicker of something, not quite hope, but a profound and startling curiosity, passed among them. Adam, the first man, his form bent not by age, but by the weight of a single catastrophic mistake, looked toward the sound. Beside him, Eve, whose face held the memory of paradise and the long sorrow of exile, reached out a trembling, translucent hand. John the Baptist, who had been beheaded and descended into this gloom only a short time before, felt a jolt of recognition. He had spoken of this. He had declared the coming of the one whose sandals he was not worthy to untie. He had announced him in the wilderness. And now, even in the wilderness of death, the voice of his Lord had come. Inside, Satan's laughter died in his throat. His arrogance faltered, replaced by a cold knot of disbelief. The King of glory, he hissed, the words tasting like ash. Who is this King of glory? He knew. He refused to know, but in the deepest pit of his being he knew. He had seen this man in the desert. He had tempted him, offered him the world. He had seen him bleed and die. Dead things came here. They became subjects. They did not come as kings. They did not issue orders to the architecture of damnation. Hades, the embodiment of death, was trembling. I have heard of him, the gravelly voice rasped. I have felt his power before, when he called that man, Lazarus, from my grasp. I felt the tug. I felt my claim weaken. He took him from me, from 4 days dead. I thought it was a fluke, a minor tear in the fabric. But this is the source of that power. He is the one who commands the dead, and they obey. He is dead, Satan roared, his voice echoing with a new, frantic edge. I saw it, the spear in his side, the water and the blood. He is flesh. He is a man. He belongs to you now, old death. He is your subject. Secure the gates, double the bars. He shall not enter. Satan's legions of demons, foul and twisted things that lurked in the deeper pits, stirred at his command. They swarmed toward the great gates from the inside, beings of fear and malice, intending to reinforce them with their own dark energy, to pile despair upon despair. They were the very antithesis of the light, and the approaching presence was a searing pain to their senses. From outside, the voice came again, this time with an undertone of thunder, the power behind it building like a gathering storm. It was the same command, but with an added weight, an impatience that was more terrifying than rage. It was the voice of a question demanding its answer. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, even lift them up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. The prophets among the waiting shades began to stir more fully. Isaiah, who had written of the suffering servant, felt his ancient words burn within his spectral form. Who is this that cometh from Edom, with dyed garments from Basra? This that is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength, he murmured, his shade-like form gaining a hint of substance. King David, the psalmist himself, stood taller, the memory of the music returning to him. He recognized the words. He had penned them under divine inspiration, a song for a triumph he could only imagine. Now, the triumph was at the door. Satan, now in a full-blown panic, screamed at the gates, at Hades, at his cowering demons. Who is this King of glory? He is a carpenter, a failed revolutionary, a dead man. His words were a desperate attempt to reinforce the reality he had built, a reality that was beginning to crack. He was trying to convince himself as much as his minions. And then the answer came, not from the voice outside, but from the choir of the righteous. David's voice, now clear and strong, rang out across the plains of Sheol, answering the question he himself had written so long ago. The other prophets and patriarchs joined him, their voices a rising chorus of fulfilled prophecy. The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. As their voices rose, a light began to dawn on the horizon of that starless land. It was not the pale, sickly glow from the ground. It was a golden, warm light, the light of a sunrise that this realm had never known. The Spirit of Christ, who had been a pinpoint, then a presence, now began to take on a form that the spirits could perceive. He appeared not as the broken man from the cross, but as a warrior king, clad in light as if in armor. His presence was no longer just a sound or a pressure, but a visible, undeniable reality. The light emanated from him in waves, and with each wave, the gray land of Hades seemed to recoil. The withered trees trembled as if in a great wind. The black river began.